Hello YouTube, I'm Millian Thompson. This video is a summary of the second proof that I wrote to demonstrate that the Earth is not flat. And how I did this is I showed that if you put in all the coordinate system and the geodetic data into a program that I wrote, you will get the difference between the distances of the top of a megastructure suspension bridge tower versus the bottom. Because in a megastructure suspension bridge, the distance between the tops of the towers is a little bit further than the distance between the bottom of the towers, or the base of the towers. And you can even see that now because the suspension bridges in China are much more colossal than the ones in the United States. And if you look at a photograph taken from a great distance that shows both towers straight on, you can actually see that the tops of the towers are a little bit further apart than the bottom, even though the towers have to be built plumb line straight up and down. And so my proof was in the part of a computer program that I wrote, and I made it available on the internet, and I documented it, that took all the data where you could input the coordinates and the geodetic data, and you can actually find out the difference in the distance between the top versus the bottom of the megastructure suspension bridge. There have been a couple different responses when I've presented this information to a flat earther. One of them was that, well, of course the towers are tilted away from each other because of the stress on the bridge, but in order for the suspension bridges to work, they have to be plumb line straight up and down. But the most interesting response that I got was the fact that a flat earther said, well, science says that the Earth curves at a rate of 8 inches per mile squared. And I thought, what? That can't be right. I mean, we can go out and test that the line of sight curvature isn't that, and so how could science say that it is? But the flat earth people use this as a kind of mental trick. They'll say that since science says that the Earth curves at a rate of 8 inches per mile squared, and the fact that the Earth really doesn't curve at that rate, then the Earth must be flat, which is a non sequitur. But anyway, I wanted to take this moment to explain that they're using the 8 inches per mile squared rule wrong. That it is not for line of sight curvature, it is for leveling. It is the amount that the Earth drops, not the amount that the Earth seems to curve. And all this started many, many years ago with Samuel Rowbotham when he wrote Zetetic Astronomy, and he got the equation for leveling out of an Encyclopedia Britannica, and he misapplied it for line of sight, and he went out and proved that the Earth, according to line of sight, doesn't really curve that way. And I've made an entirely different video on what this 8 inch per mile squared rule really is, and the fact that it actually does give an accurate representation of the amount of drop that we see in leveling from a horizontal plane, but it is not at all at the degree of curvature from line of sight. And I'd like to conclude with a couple other interesting points other people have made about the way that suspension bridges prove that the Earth is not flat.
It might seem flat over short distances, but over longer ones, well, the Earth is pretty darn curvy. The Verrazano Narrows Bridge, connecting Staten Island and Brooklyn, had to be designed with Earth's roundness in mind. Its 2 towers, separated by 1,300 meters and perfectly vertical, are nonetheless 41 millimeters further apart at the top than at the bottom because of Earth's curvature.
Let's take a look at the construction of the Golden Gate Bridge. Its 2 towers are about 4,200 feet apart, and due to the curvature of the Earth, the tops of the towers are less than 2 inches wider apart than the bottoms of the towers. That's almost not even worth paying attention to. But when you start dealing with larger areas, you'll begin to accumulate some pretty considerable errors in your calculations if you don't begin taking this curvature into account. This is explicitly stated in just about every handbook and textbook dealing with surveying, radio broadcast engineering, aircraft and space vehicles, and numerous other fields. And you don't have to take any of this on faith, because you can actually go out and reproduce these measurements yourself. There are maps available for every state showing the locations of various benchmarks where measurements were taken to establish the geodetic datums and coordinate systems that the whole world uses. You can also look up the triangulation data for numerous bridges and other structures where curvature was taken into account. And in some cases, you can actually see where they compensated for it. So the curvature is out there, it is measurable, and anyone who says otherwise is either ignorant or a liar. And in case you haven't noticed by now, there are a lot of ignorant liars in the Flat Earth community.